and this is the preparedness. Civil defense, earth changes, space, weather, plagues, and of course Fukushima, as well as what I call the analysis of world events. We're literally converging in a whole series of things that, if with the access to the information we have compared to the ancient prophets, where they could only hear basically about coming events, didn't fully understand them in their time when they heard from God. But we're in a time when basically all these things are converging right now. And if you are a sober mind and a scientific bent and journalistically want to know the truth despite it, how ugly it is or how it shows that your nation or other nations are doing things that are reprehensible, the latest, of course, being Hamas is being decimated and the state of Palestine, they're being crushed with repeated failures of the truth by the Israelis that are literally slaughtering not only civilians but children especially, even bombing the United Nations schools, etc., where they're even told people to go there, and then they bombed them afterwards, shelled them. We have the spread of Ebola all over the world, and it's only a plane ride away. In fact, we found out talked to Ann earlier, that there's a large community from Liberia in the Minnesota area, which I think is kind of interesting, especially when we've had now reports of one person recently, just a few days ago, was going to go back home, which is North Carolina, and was literally under quarantine or suspicion of exposure and early signs of Ebola. And by the way, Ebola has a 90% death rate, 90%. But the virus has all the characteristics of what I call a super plague, which means you can shed the virus for 21 days, which no version of Ebola ever was like that before. You can become a typhoid Mary, infecting thousands of people before you even get violently ill and start to expire or bleed from every orifice. This is like right out of some nightmare. And the fact is that the World Health Organization is only starting to push the panic button too damn late, because this weekend, next weekend, we could have an Ebola index case arrive anywhere in the United States. All the other people on the aircraft, because sneezing can spread the virus, could be infected, and a large percentage of those aren't going to be properly tracked. The aircraft doesn't have a HEPA filter to grab any particles, air droplets, etc., that are airborne. They're not going to do a chain of custody to take that kind of trap and send it off to a CDC-certified lab to see if they can grow out any of these pathogens, including resistant TB or Ebola or any other pathogen like H7N9. So we're literally sitting ducks. We're not even using the common sense that even early Boeing aerospace people did in the mid-'80s, which is to have HEPA filters in every aircraft. So we're beyond stupid. This is just plain evil. So to give us an update, we have John and Ann. Ann, tell us about Ebola first, then we'll hear from John in terms of what's going on with all the other stuff that's happening. Lots of it is.
Well, this the Ebola virus, they're calling it Ebola viral disease, EVD, was first found in Guinea, which is in the western side of Africa. It's in equatorial Africa. It's sub-Saharan, and it spread into Sierra Leone, which denied it for the longest time, and then it spread into Liberia, which is south of Sierra Leone. And it is an unusual strain, and how it became unusual is open to debate. But the unusual part of it is that it has an incubation period of 21 days. Now, an incubation period is the time between when a person is exposed to the virus and the time that they start exhibiting symptoms.
Right.
As it turns out, some people are not being diagnosed with EVD. Instead, they're being diagnosed with malaria or other diseases. It often presents first as kind of a flu, headache, body ache, and those are not the symptoms that they're looking for. They're looking only for a temperature, and it may not even present with a temperature until the person is very sick. So from the time that the person exhibits the first symptoms, in fact, from the time that the Ebola virus is inside the person, that person is contagious. And the death rate, case fatality rate, is about 60%, as near as they can tell right now. Of course, that is in Western Africa, which doesn't have our medical infrastructure. However, it has spread to the capital cities of both Guinea and Sierra Leone, and the capital cities do have modern hospitals, they do have modern sanitation, and in fact they even have airports. Now most of the airplanes that fly into and out of these three countries are regional airlines, that is, they don't fly other than to surrounding countries in Africa. However, about 10% of the flights go into France because there are a lot of French workers there. And they were evacuated early on and flown back to France. And I don't know if they were fired or, I don't know what their status is. They're not working in West Africa anymore. So, it's possible that people who are trying to escape this, and if you talk to the Liberian community up in Minnesota, they're frantic about their friends and relatives, and there's quite a few flights going from that area into West Africa. Yeah,
and they incubate it for 21 days, which means they can shed virus for 3 weeks, and there's no tracking. There's no system to track people coming in because all these deadly viruses are going to come in a big aluminum air-compressed tube called an AIRLINER. All of them, not some. They're not going to come on toys coming from China because the virus wouldn't survive. They're not going to come in a container of lumber. They're going to come in a jet with a person's, literally the incubator, or if you want to call it the personal virus transport biological device. And those devices are going to arrive here thinking they're fine. They may have a little fever and chills, but otherwise, other than a little bit of cough on the airliner, they're just fine.
Yes, well, that's the problem. They're looking for the right symptoms, and there could be 14. There could be 2 weeks between the first symptoms and the final result. Once the fatal symptoms appear, it takes about 2 days to die.
Right.
And so there's no contact tracing. There's no isolation of people who are coming in with the sniffles or with body aches or anything like that.
Dave Hodges put up a report that he has evidence from the inside in the government that the CDC has already been setting up Ebola isolation centers across the country. And it's my guess that despite the fact they don't have, any kind of early warning system or air system to literally make the aircraft safer so they don't blow the virus all through the inside of the cabin of the aircraft using air filtration systems that have filters, that they're basically not prepared for anything until they finally hit the switch and say we're now medical martial law, which, by the way, hands over our entire military and our healthcare system to the United Nations and the World Health Organization. So we'll effectively have a de facto world biological martial law. That's what I've said is the most likely, because people would be panicky to take whatever drug or virus vaccine or whatever they can. A lot of the people don't realize, firstly, the vaccines don't work, number one. Number two, a lot of them are grown on aborted fetal tissue. And number three, they actually may speed the actual genetic modification and mutation of these pathogens, so they actually may speed the process of making them more deadly.
Well, you don't want to go to an isolation center. What you want to do is you want to self-quarantine. And you could do that starting today, especially if you live. Now, the airlines that do fly out of West Africa go into LaGuardia in New York, Atlanta, Georgia, and Dallas, Fort Worth. And, in fact, there is now a family that is in self-quarantine, which, as near as I can tell from reading the newspaper accounts, means that they take their temperature once a day to see if they have a temperature. Otherwise, there's no other monitoring, and there's no home quarantine. Nobody's checking up to make sure that they stay home. They have no ankle bracelets. They're just taking their temperature once a day, and by the time a temperature occurs, that person could be.
They're ready to go. It's called symptom to dispatch day. The interval is very short, and it's the end of the process.
Yes.
Back in a moment. We'll hear from John in just a second. So, welcome back, and you mentioned something very important about the northern lights, and in fact, you mentioned that we're seeing red, and the color, which of course indicated, according to your analysis, the only thing that will produce red is strontium-90. a lot of people would think, well, the West Coast, you guys are getting slammed. No. Most of the radiation is at fairly high altitude, except for the stuff that dissolved in the ocean water. And that fairly high altitude means it's going to hit the mountains up, say, up near Idaho. It's going to go across the Rocky Mountains. In fact, it may dip on the east side of the Rocky Mountains, like it has several times in the past few weeks. Dive down to the Midwest, as far away as, say, southern Indiana. Head back up toward the northeast, toward Vermont and the East Coast, and then, of course, cross the Atlantic Ocean. Ordinarily, but the jet stream is gone. Obviously, whatever they're doing to manipulate the weather, they're determined to make sure that only weather that arrives here in the United States arrives with rain from the monsoons. So we had little rain on Lake Henshaw toward Palomar Mountain and up toward the Sierra Mountains, up toward Shasta, but we're not getting rain. I mean, we're just not getting rain from the northern Pacific. The fisheries, we have lots of reports, which I'm going to post up, about the death of the fisheries. And, of course, one report here, the daily costs from Alaska. Alaskan fisheries in the midst of an economic collapse. Basically, they're going, bye-bye, see ya. It's the end of the fisheries in Alaska. So let's talk about this for a minute, and the presence of this unusual color that we're seeing in the upper atmosphere, the presence of these other long-acting isotopes. That's pretty scary. And the death of the fisheries indicates that we're starting to get bioaccumulation, not only in the oceans, but it could be quite distant. And it may not be like people think, well, it's going to hit the West Coast. No. Most of the time, these streams of radiation are hitting the border between U.S. and Canada, and then they're diving down along the Rocky Mountains toward the Midwest and then back up toward the Northeast. So they're going to hit the bread belt. As bioaccumulation starts to increase, it's going to knock off the unborn, so there are not going to be as many viable pregnancies. It's going to kill the elderly, and it's going to start increasing cancer rates dramatically, as well as dementia, cardiac arrhythmias, etc. And I don't think people grasp just how serious this is. We have pinheads for government. We have cowards for congressmen and senators that are hard to teach and treat. To say, look, you don't know what you're talking about. We want to teach you because we are the experts out here. And so, Ann, what's going on? Because this is very serious. It's something that people can do something about personally, but our political officials are doing nothing to make sure our water, air, and food is safe. Yeah,
the climate, the clouds, the pressure, low pressure, and high pressure systems are fairly stagnant. They're not moving because there's no northern jet stream to speak of. If you look at the northern jet stream today, all you'll see is bits and pieces around the globe. Somewhere about 45 degrees north latitude. But there's nothing over the United States. So there's nothing to move the air across the United States at the jet stream level. I mean, there's just no movement at that level. What we were talking about was the aurora borealis that occurred early this week. And it did come as far south as Michigan. And it was red. Now, an aurora borealis is normally green. If you see a green or green-blue aurora borealis, you're in good shape. But if you see a red one, that is highly unusual. And what that means is that there's strontium up there at the stratosphere level. Strontium is a metal, and it burns when electrified as red. And so when they said that it was an unusual aurora borealis, I expected somebody in the scientific community to come out and say, oh, well, that's caused by. But what they say is, we don't know why it was red. But you and I can figure it out because we know about the fire colors. We know that when you test certain metals with fire, with flame, the flame test, for instance, sodium burns yellow. You and I both know that. I mean, we learned that in high school.
Yeah.
The flame test it's part of basic studies in high school. And when you see red, that's what they use in firecrackers. They use strontium in firecrackers to make red. So that means that there's strontium-90 high in the atmosphere. Now, the storms that we have in the Midwest are high enough that they will bring down, when you have this lightning and all that water that comes down, it washes out the atmosphere. So I'm not too worried about those of us who live in the Midwest, because we have storms that quite often go up to 60,000, 70,000 feet. But the people along the northern border and the people along the west coast, they don't have those kinds of storms. And so the heavy elements, the heavy radionuclides, fall down to Earth, and because they're falling so slowly, people breathe them in. And that's right, you get all sorts of health problems. Strontium is absorbed by the body like calcium. It just it puts it where it thinks calcium should go. But it's not calcium, it's strontium. And so it doesn't work right. I mean, it's there in the body. The body thinks it's calcium, but when it goes to do the physical processes, it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also more avidly absorbed by the body, strontium and cesium, than magnesium and calcium.
Well, cesium comes in as potassium, and potassium is very important for regulating the ion.
It's an analog of both, actually. It's an analog of both magnesium and potassium. So if the body will suck it in as if you're magnesium deficient or potassium. It's going to grab that cesium-137. The strontium is an analog of calcium. So it really, if you've got both these long-acting isotopes that are over 30 years, you're going to bioaccumulate massive amounts of these isotopes in your body that are going to really screw up your many enzyme processes that rely on them.
Yeah, and you men out there who think that a California girl is the right mate for you, think again. You're going to have abortions. You're going to have miscarriages. You may never have a normal child.
It's not just California. That's one thing that I want to clarify over and over again. The West Coast isn't the highest radiation. The highest radiation levels are at higher altitudes. They're hitting the mountains. They're going further east. Our radiation levels here have been relatively stable for many months. What's going on is we're seeing radiation levels in the mountains and other sites that are taking off like a rocket because they're precipitating because they cold and hot air masses meet, or they don't descend to ground level until they actually get, say, across to the Midwest or even across to the shores of Europe. Plus, they also can not only just go east-west, but we're seeing transpolar radiation. There's been evidence that some of the radiation plumes are not just circling the Earth around from the west to the east. They're actually going right over the poles to land in Europe and Eastern Europe.
No, I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, some evidence. Literally a year and a half ago, we had a surge of plutonium. They thought it was first from a reactor in Belarus and in Estonia. They thought it might have been one of those ones. It's the old Chernobyl-style reactor, and they found out it wasn't. It was actually transpolar radiation with plutonium isotopes that went over the poles.
Wow, that's from Fukushima, huh?
Fukushima. It's doing everybody. And by the way, you in the Southern Hemisphere, if you listen to Dr. Helen Caldicott and think you can be smug, your radiation levels won't reach as high, but you're going to get there. Those transoceanic currents that carry the ocean waters along the coast to 26 months to cover the whole world, everywhere, every ocean is getting more radioactive, and there's 300 times more water carried in the upper atmosphere, 80 to 100,000 feet.
By the way, have you heard of Mexican bamboo?
I have not. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report with Dr. Deagle. This is John Moore and Ann Morrison. Dr. Deagle is just taking a break away from the microphone. He should be back momentarily. I was talking this morning with Ann about this Ebola and how there's a family of 4 that are in quarantine. And I made a statement that Ann thought I should repeat, so I'm going to repeat it. If there's multiple members of a family, more than one person, that need to be quarantined, they should be quarantined separately. If one person has contracted the Ebola virus, there's no need why the other family members need to be exposed to it. So
that's good advice, John, because that's exactly true. In fact, one of the things that they talked about quarantine back in the time around 2001 is when they talk about bioterrorism. The federal government was actually talking about the idea of mass quarantine at, say, the airport, where which is down in the south end of Aurora, Colorado, where they literally put, say, 500 or 600 men on cots, similar to what they did back in World War I, when they had the Spanish flu pandemic, which basically made sure everybody got cross-contaminated. It was catastrophic. Yeah, stupid is what it was.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have the facilities to quarantine people individually, I guess you're left no choice, but that's not the case. We do have the facilities to quarantine people individually to avoid cross-contamination. As I said off air a couple of minutes ago, just because Dad may have contracted and got the infection, no need for Mom and the two kids to get the infection as well.
But, of course, if your goal is to eliminate the population, you want them cross-contaminate, so you want to make sure whether it's a radiological weapon like cobalt-60 sticky dirty bomb or a pandemic virus, you want to make sure they maintain maximum contact so they receive an inoculum of the deadly pathogen. So you have to figure out who's planning it and why are they planning it a specific way, because it's not just incompetence, it's evil. And evil is a word we've dissected from the American lexicon of journalism. Very few journalists will use the word evil in any of their dialogue.
I had not thought about it, but I think you're probably right. Wordsmithing and word manipulation I've been very cognizant of since at least the Nixon administration, when he invaded a country and called it a limited incursion when he invaded Cambodia.
I'm sure they'll have all kinds of twisted, weird words for, it's almost like you put your face in the place of my rapidly accelerating fist in terms of the Palestinians, what's going on there. It's that kind of twisted, weird, non-logical, almost assaultive form of dialogue that not only treats you like you're an idiot, but treats you that if you think other than the way that they want you to think, you're abusive to them or somehow there's something weird about you.
Absolutely. There was an incident in Indianapolis recently where a African-American gentleman was kind of a bit bonkers with an AK-47 on a back street of Indianapolis. Police officer responded and got out of his patrol car and was promptly murdered by the gentleman with the AK. Family members of the African-American gentleman were stating publicly that the police officer should not get out of his car.
Oh, really?
And if he had not got out of his car, he wouldn't have been murdered. Within days, there were groups of Indianapolis police officers making videos, 10, 15, 20 at a time, all stating in unison that they will always get out of their cars.
Get out of that way. We're getting out of our cars. How's that?
Yes. But we run into these bizarre mindsets a lot, both from public government officials and in the private sector, both, don't we?
Yeah. It's like people have an allergy to the truth or good questions. The set of issues that we have kind of before us this summer is we have the mounting slaughter of the Gazans. Have you ever heard of this statement done by Mr. Putin here just yesterday? It's called the Dead Hand Order. Have you heard of that one?
No, sir.
Dead Hand Order. The Dead Hand Order last was done in 1983 by the Soviet premier. And basically it means that you go to fully automatic launch on command sequence if any nation indicates that there's any kind of thermal or a satellite or other image indicating that they're launching nuclear weapons on you. You do a full launch on your enemy, you lock on all their cities, and you vaporize them. And so the first time in 31 years, we have Russia, the emergent, which never went away, I think, Soviet Union, now retooled, has basically said, make my day. And they said this to NATO to say, what do you think you're doing? You're going to deploy troops in Kiev? And now, by the way, Yatsenyuk's government has fallen. Who are the maniacs actually that are still shelling or damaging or destroying people in Slavyansk and Donetsk? And by the way, I think is it the son of our vice president is actually over there as one of the main representatives of an oil company that's doing oil research for oil shale research for the massive Donetsk basin, which means it comes down to energy and money again. And here it is, the vice president's son is directly involved in it. Isn't that remarkable?
It's not remarkable at all, and that's the way the world works.
Right. So what I think is going to happen, Putin basically had the Duma meet, and one of the rules I've learned is whether it's the Israeli government or the American government or the Russian government, if you hear behind the scenes that someone's meeting, quote, but no word comes out from any journalist, it means something bad's going to happen. If they say anything, don't even believe what they say, but believe that nothing probably will happen because it's going to be smoke and mirrors and try to kind of massage the public or steer the public to believe something. The fact that they've met, and now we have massive troops that have moved to the border near Kiev, it means the Russians are ticked. And if they're ticked and there is any troop movement at all toward NATO, which apparently is going to happen in the next few weeks, the Russians are going to launch some massive invasion. And Kiev's going to get crushed. In fact, that's probably why Yatsenyuk and his government fell, because these people, even if they're oligarchs, billionaires, or just maniacs, neo-Nazis in Kiev, they do want to breathe air. They want to have a pulse. They want to see a sunrise and a sunset. And they actually want to be able to have cereal in the morning, i.e. be still alive. And their lifespan, if you tick off the Russians, is going to be significantly shortened. The same way as the maniacs that now Israel is doing this against the Gazans, because their next move is they're just itching to attack Iran and Syria. They're just begging. They're just saying, we've got to do this. There's some of them that are in some kind of like a psychotic rage. And I think that Israel is doing this out of desperation. It's not out of strength. The attack on Gazans and the slaughter of babies, and the comments by Mr. Netanyahu, I call him nuts because he is nuts, that how dare the Palestinians show telegenic pictures of babies with their brains blown off? How dare they just try to support their cause with telegenic dead babies? I think Mr. Netanyahu could give a rat's behind if every Jew, Muslim, Arab, Christian in Israel that belongs to Israel and is an Israeli citizen is dead from the missile attacks that are going to soon come. When Israel starts this war, even if they have all their nukes and their Samson option, they're all going to die. Anybody in Israel who thinks that they're going to survive what's coming need to have their head examined, because they're not.
Well, Doctor, we're dealing with people who are suffering from psychosis, in my estimation, on both sides.
You're a military man, and you understand that if you look strategically at this, every move that they made, and of course we're doing the same thing, they ran out of military munitions. They didn't even have to ask for us to say, yeah, you can use all our munitions. You ran out 10 days ago, no problem. And at the same time, we have various people in the Department for Obama criticizing the Palestinian decimation. We're giving them hundreds of millions of dollars more, trying to get them through the Senate, and the bill apparently collapsed, for more Iron Dome and more munitions and more fancy weapons, not only to attack the Gazans, but to hit Iran. I mean, if you really want to start World War III, attack Syria and Iran, because they're kind of like a dual set. They go together. And I know some morons out there made some stupid statements thinking that the so-called alliance between Syria and Iran is broken. Wrong. And now we have Maliki, who's actually connected it all together because he's Shiite as well. This is going to get over the top nuts between now and the fall, and people need to realize an economic collapse is coming. A military catastrophe is coming there and in Ukraine. And it's all tied together to bringing us to a peace treaty that won't stay long. Baling wire and chewing gum. Well, I'm going to give some preparedness advice first. First thing, I had Ted Anderson on yesterday with Midas Resources, and their number is 800-686-2237. First thing you better do is, I tell people 1/3 of your physical and natural resources should be in prepper supplies, 1/3 should be in gold and silver coin, low denominations, and 1/3 should be in things that you can get, quote, out of debt and into commodities that can be exchanged for during the time when the economy either collapses partially or completely. It's my guess, looking at the timeline, that we're not going to have a single process. It's going to be multi-layers process. The first thing is, we already are in a period of what I call pre-hyperinflation, which means if you actually look at apartment rates going up and the cost of food and boxes getting smaller, portions getting smaller, and restaurant rates going up. The collapse of meat, for example, the drought and the amount of cattle and livestock that have been sacrificed. In fact, I heard an interesting comment. I was out the other night took my wife out to Dave's barbecue, and of course I like barbecue chicken, and I don't have the sauces and everything. I just have the chicken itself without the skin and all that high sugary sauce. I just have chicken. And he said we had to apologize. The chickens are smaller because there's been a big drought. I'm thinking, what do you mean you didn't feed your chickens enough water? Of course, I'm cracking a joke to the guy telling us that. And I looked at him like, that sounds really funny, but it's not true. The fact is, though, the pasta food's going to go through the ceiling. So next, you got to get yourself in shape. If you haven't been moving around or exercising enough, get a vibrational platform, get into some body elastic bands, get into some walking programs, get off the damn toxic polypharmacy, get on nutraceuticals, get your Nutrimeds, get stockpiled up, have heritage seeds, get a greenhouse. Even if you don't have a greenhouse, build it one with 100 mil poly, get a Bev 100 system. You can assume that somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere, there's going to be a nuclear war, even if it's just between Israel and surrounding nations. And hitting the Bashar reactor plus Fukushima, it means the world's going to become considerably more radioactive, and you don't want to bioaccumulate it in your body. And I tell people that you got to start thinking community. I watched this show, Doomsday Preppers, and I think this is to try to either do one of two things. Make people seem that if you're a prepper, you're psychotic, number one. This is the network that's putting this on. Or number two, they don't talk community except a few places like the Colony, where they get it that you need a large number of people to survive beyond 2 months. The first month or two, you might be okay if you're in your bunker or if you're in your kind of like your bomb shelter below your garage and you've got 2 months of food. But when you actually have to come out and survive for, years after that, and I always get a kick out of the report at the end of the Doomsday Preppers. It says, you have 11 months of initial survival. And, of course, they're talking about guys that are, 30 years in the Navy or Special Forces, Delta. These guys have all kinds of skill sets. And yet, if they're not in the community, they're going to die too. And I think, John, you and I talked about this before. We need to have a whole set of skills, whether it's communication and ham radio, medical skills, surgical skills. Everybody has to have redundancy too, so people know how to do ACLS, ATLS, basic life support, basic trauma support, deal with wounds, injuries, fractures, just stuff in your eyes, being able to stay clean, how to prevent all kinds of stuff from happening that you wouldn't expect. Right now, for example, the ultraviolet light's really dangerous, and I tell people, if you don't have the type of ultraviolet light protective clothing out there and eyewear, just being outside can be dangerous now during the midday. And in fact, I talked to our guy that does all our sprinklers, and he said the same thing. So, John, do you have any ideas on this? Because I really see a plague coming by the fall.
Right.
I see economic catastrophe, a bond run. I see gold going over 2,000 an ounce by this fall. 2,200, I think, is where I'm guessing it's going to go. And I think, yes, it'll fluctuate. It'll go to 2,200, 2,800, drop back to 2,500. It's never going back to under 1,300. Once this train wreck starts collapsing, gold and silver, no matter how much they try to restrain it with their paper games, the Chinese and the Indians and everybody else who's trying to buy gold, who knows the whole system's flying apart, they're not going to stop it. And everybody needs to start realizing: do you want to find out that your cost of bread is 4 times more in a year? Do you want to find out that your pension funds and your equity in your home is gone? Do you want to realize that your government basically has totally been a traitor? They're printing money like crazy to send more weapon systems to our potential enemies, and they really have no capacity to project a war. I mean, if we actually started to get into a real big war in Iraq, which now we can't do it. We can't afford it. John, your comments. Ann.
Well, what the president is doing is he's in the process of reducing the number of men and women in the U.S. military to where they were in December 1941, before the start of World War II. Less than 500,000, in the 400,000 something range, which all the military experts all are in agreement that that's way too small in today's dangerous world, but that's where we're going. And that plan has been in place before Obama. It's been in place for quite a few years. I think people need to learn how to be ready to self-quarantine so that they will have the strongest immune system possible when this thing hits us. That those under age 5, those over 70, the most vulnerable parts of our families will be very well protected. The healthier people with the stronger immune systems can go out and run errands, go to work as long as there is work to go to, buy food as long as there's food to buy at the grocery store, and conduct business. While those who are more vulnerable with weakened immune systems stay in the self-quarantine safety of their homes. But people need to know how to do this, and they need to learn how to do that right now while things are still available. Doctor, if 3% of the adults in this country figure out they need protective equipment, that Ann talks about frequently will all be sold in less than a week. There's not that much. There's not enough inventory to satisfy 4 or even 5% of the.
That's why we tell people even to order from us Nutridyne, Allison Med, other things for a plague. We have things that'll kill off Ebola. We have NIOSH N95 masks. We have the protective zinc wipes that'll kill all RNA and DNA viruses, like our defense wipes, that will kill all viruses on contact and are biodegradable, won't destroy your health. The fact is, though, that if everybody who actually believed us actually ordered, we would be so swamped, it would be mind-boggling. And when we had that plague of the H1N1 flu back in 2009, we got so clobbered, and people are so ticked off at us because they were terrified. That's only a minor shadow of what's coming. And by the way, that people, and I'm going to include doctors, and I won't mention their names, but some of these knucklehead doctors who are not specialists and understand infectious disease, they need to shut the heck up. Okay? Because 10 times more young people that had no pre-existing health condition died than any other time since 1918. So when you assume out there, knuckleheads, that you know more about that than me, you need to come face to face and call into this program, or you need to write a letter to me, and I'm going to set you straight. When these plagues return, H1N1, H7N1, Ebola, whatever, and there's going to be multiple. They could hit us with multiple waves because these are all bioengineered. They're all tweaked, just like the swine flu that's arriving now with these young people that are illegal immigrants. The swine flu came out of a facility, a little town right beside the Baxter Lab facility where they're doing genetic engineering and viruses for one of the largest corporations in the world, Baxter, that makes all like IV tubing and medical equipment and needles and everything, and vaccine research. And you know damn well that they're doing it. I mean, I got lots of reports I'll post up here on diploid cell lines. Most people don't read, what's a diploid cell line? These are aborted fetuses they're using for making vaccines. And when they use these things, they vastly increase the chances that the virus or pathogen can be changed to become much more lethal. They know that. Scientists know that. But guess what? They're not going to tell you that, by the way, these vaccines won't help you. They might hurt you with heavy metal adjuvants and other toxic crap. So I think my bets are, and it's not the end of the world, my bets are things are going to get really bad, painfully bad, so bad that actually we're going to accept a peace treaty, which is why the blood moons are happening now. And that peace treaty is going to allow the Jews and the United Nations to impose a partitioning of the state into Palestine and Israel and allow the Jews to start a blood sacrifice on the Temple Mount. And that's the abomination that desolates. Now, I'm saying this in advance so you know that that's what I pronounced in 1999 when I traveled to Israel. I'm telling you that again. It's very straightforward in God's Word. And when you see the geopolitical signs and you're hearing John Moore, the top expert on how to prepare, and Morrison, our scientist, telling you how these plagues are coming, if you're not preparing, you're going to be in a state of abject shock when things really hit the wall and gold's $2,500 an ounce or something, and food is doubled or tripled. And the president is calling now for emergency resources for an expanding war in Iraq. And then after the elections, and this is from what I've heard inside the party, the Republicans are going to throw Mr. Boehner aside and Mr. Paul Ryan, who tried to play a game, and they're going to impeach Obama, and he's going to go nuts and try to start martial law. If you don't think that's going to happen after the elections, you just watch. What do you think, John and Ann?
Well, I agree with you, Doctor, and this is the Liberty Man signing off. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thelibertyman.com, homeland-defenseforyou.com.